Okay, so hi everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Ella. I'm co-founder and CMO here at Minespider, and I'll be your host for the next hour. So today we're going to walk through what digital battery passport implementation actually looks like on the ground. So we all know that the DPP is mandatory as of February next year. But today what we're going to unpack is some of the most common concerns we hear. So where the data comes from, how long this actually takes, what it costs, and of course, what the hard parts are. And I'm joined by three people who work on this every single day. So first off, Jackie, our head of sales, who has been with us over 4 years and has spoken with literally hundreds of players across the battery market, from small manufacturers to billion-dollar multinationals, plus all the importers, recyclers, and suppliers. So she has a real feel for the questions and concerns that come up again and again. Then we have Pavlina, our head of project management, who has been with us over 5 years. So Pavlina leads implementation with our clients day to day, mapping what data they already have, finding the gaps, working out how it flows in from their systems and their suppliers, and getting real passports live. She knows exactly what the hard parts are. And finally, we have Nathan, our founder and CEO. Nathan has been building this platform since we started 8 years ago, and he leads the technical side. So how the passport connects to the systems companies already run, into Catena-X and the EU DPP Registry, and how we keep pace with everything that the regulation is still finalizing. So just some housekeeping before we begin. Please pop any questions you have in the Q&A, and we'll answer them at the end of the discussion. And if we run out of time, we'll email you the responses. So without further ado, let's get into it. Jackie, I'm going to start with you. So you speak to battery manufacturers every single day. What's the number one question you're getting right now about the battery passport?
Yeah, so hi everyone. Happy to be here today. Yeah, it's interesting because this question has changed completely over the past year. So 12 months ago, almost every meeting started with someone asking, what exactly is a digital battery passport? But today, that's rarely the conversation. Companies already know the regulation is coming. The question I hear almost every day now is, where do we actually start, right? And honestly, I completely understand why. When companies start looking internally, they quickly realize the data is not sitting in one place ready to be published. So part of it is in the ERP, technical information lives somewhere else, sustainability data belongs to another team, supplier declarations are in spreadsheets or PDFs, and suddenly it becomes much more bigger than they expected. So what I often see is that companies feel they need to solve all of that before they actually begin. But after speaking with hundreds of companies, I honestly haven't met one that had everything perfectly organized from day one. So the companies making the most progress are simply the ones that start. So they choose one battery model, they build the first passport, they understand where the gaps are, and then they improve from there. And that's why I always tell customers, don't wait for perfection because implementation itself is what will give you the visibility into still what needs to be done.
Yeah, no, I love that. I think that's a great start. Okay, Pavlina, I'm going to jump to you next. When a company finally decides to move on this, what actually happens in the first few weeks? So what does day one look like?
Thank you, Ella. Hello, everyone. Yeah, just to build on what Jackie mentioned. So when we start the battery passport projects, we usually go around a phased approach. So what will happen in the first few weeks and actually on day one is exactly that point, confirming the use case, the type of battery categories that a company would have, and what of those data attributes and detailed requirements they already have as a starting point. So usually in the first engagement session, we typically confirm which of those battery categories they have fall within the scope of the battery passport requirements. Then we would try to identify what are the parties involved in obtaining those details for the battery passport. So this would usually involve clarifying the role of the economic operator, whether data is coming from other suppliers or other parties or third parties that we need to consider afterwards for the integration phase. And of course, the most important bit is the exchange of the data attribute details and review of what is available and from which type of partner it's coming. So usually those would be the starting points so that we have a better overview. So yeah, the starting goal, the first output usually is not a perfect passport, but is passport in which companies already have a very good overview of what they have available, where there might be a gap, and how we can actually create and build an achievable implementation plan so that they are on time with the requirement and being compliant.
Brilliant. No, I think that's great. It shows step by step, right? We don't expect everyone to come in with perfect data and a perfect plan. So no, thank you, Pavlina.
Exactly.
Nathan, next question is for you. So let's get the basics straight. What is a digital battery passport in practice? Not the legal definition, but what it actually is.
You know what's funny is that there is no actual legal definition. The legal text sort of hints at what the battery passport is, and people will talk about it as a digital record of the battery. But where there's been a lot of confusion over the years is in the edges of what constitutes a battery passport. At the beginning, there were groups like Global Battery Alliance and others who were focused on the data attributes. And so they sort of looked at the battery passport as a standard. Now, like companies like us, we started to focus on the technical side, and we started to say, well, it's a digital, unique digital representation, or almost like a digital twin of the battery. What we're seeing is that as more clarification has come to the regulation, as we've got more implementing acts, and as different groups have built out the standards, there's been a consolidation of what the battery passport is. And it's you can think of it as a digital record of the history of the battery. And I love the name passport, always have, because a passport helps a person get across a border, and it helps them to get where they need to go. And the battery passport does the same thing. It keeps a record of what the battery is, what the chemistry is, and helps it get to the end of its life in the recycling stage. And the last piece is that it's not so much that it's a record; it's that it is a well-structured record that has certain requirements, such as certifications, backups, digital signing to prevent fraud, so that everyone who gets the data that's in that record is sure that it's really the correct data for that battery. It's to give confidence to consumers.
Brilliant. No, I love that. Also, a broader view with a technical background there. Jackie, when you first speak to a company, what's the biggest misconception they have about implementing DBPs?
Yeah, so we work with companies placing as few as 200 batteries per year and others placing up to 250,000 batteries per year. But despite the huge difference in scale, I think the biggest misconception is often exactly the same. Companies believe they should wait until every delegated act and every regulatory detail is published before actually starting the battery passport project. And I completely understand where that comes from, because everyone wants certainty before investing time and resources. But in reality, waiting is probably the biggest risk here, because the regulation will continue to evolve. So there will always be new implementing acts, guidance documents, and technical standards coming out. So if companies wait everything to be 100% final, they may leave themselves very little time to actually implement it. So what we are seeing instead is that the companies making the most progress today, they are building the foundation now. So they are understanding their data, identifying where the information comes from, defining internal ownership, and also creating their first battery passports. Then, as new requirements are published, then they can adapt and then expand that. So that approach works whether a company produces a few hundred batteries or hundreds of thousands. So my advice is always the same here. Don't wait for the regulation to stop evolving, because we know it won't. So start building the foundation now, and you will be in a much stronger position when the remaining requirements are finalized.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you. I have a slight change of direction here towards industrial batteries. So Pavlina, industrial batteries, they bring a different set of challenges. So what does the data picture actually look like for an industrial battery manufacturer, and how is that different from an EV maker?
Yeah, very good question. So in total, when we speak about the battery passport and the data requirements there, so there are around 100 data attributes that different battery categories should comply with. So for example, for EV batteries, we are looking at around 90 data attributes that are applicable. On the other side, if we look at the industrial battery category, we have two subgroups here. We have the stationary energy storage batteries, and we have the other industrial type of batteries. And they have a bit less or a bit more, depending on the category here, compared with the EV. So that would be the first, let's say, differentiator when it comes to this. But the main difference is in terms of the product structure and the data ownership here, which can be very different. So for example, EV manufacturers, EV battery manufacturers, they almost often have relatively mature systems. They have established battery models. And the main challenge here is because it's a closed system, maintaining the large volume of data or finding out from which sources is coming so that they can make that connection and build the battery passport. On the industrial battery side of things, it's a bit different because here we have a case where industrial batteries can cover a much broader range of configurations. So we can have modular batteries, batteries for individual backup, and large container batteries, which are also having a different types of use. So here more the question is about the passport granularity. Do you need the passport on a pack level? Do you need it on a system level? How do you handle that? Where does it sit? Do you connect them one to another? And so on. So in that sense, I would say, let's say it's a bit more challenging at the beginning, and having in mind that the modular structure components might be changed during use. You take out one model, put another one, the relationship is a bit different. So the number of attributes is comparable, but then the difference lies mostly in terms of the product structure, where the data comes from, and how do you handle it in terms of the granularity levels at which point in time.
Brilliant. I think we have a lot of industrial battery manufacturers on this webinar, so I'm sure they're listening to that one. Nathan, there's something happening 3 days from now. We have the EU DPP Registry going live. What is it, and what does registration actually involve for a manufacturer?
Yeah, so everyone's been waiting on this EU DPP registry to come online. The good news is the first stage of this is going to be a testing environment where providers such as Minespider and others will be able to interact with it and make sure that we can make the connections. So we don't have an immediate need on the manufacturers on Sunday. You don't have to panic. The way that it's going to work is that the EU wants to have a registry of all the batteries that are put on the market in the EU. The EU is not going to have a central repository of all the data in the battery passports. What it is a list of what battery identifiers are there and pointers to where the data is stored. So a lot of the work of integrating with the registry is going to be on our side. Now, the way that it works is that every manufacturer needs to have a qualified electronic seal that they will need to get from a provider. We would get one as well. And then you have to sign the passports, and then we push that signed data to the EU registry so that the EU is confident that the manufacturer that has put the battery on the market has verified that the data is correct. And that's effectively what it is. And it makes sure that people that get the batteries later down the line can scan the QR code, can get access to the battery passport, and know that it was registered properly.
Brilliant. Thank you for decoding that one. Jackie, when a company decides to move forward, where do you recommend they actually start, or how do you recommend they actually start, like all at once or in phases?
Yeah, no, definitely in phases. I think that's the approach we've seen work best across our projects. We normally recommend 3 phases. So phase 1 would be the one that we call the foundation and the gap analysis phase. And it typically takes around 10 to 12 weeks. And this is where we build the foundation for the whole project. So we run workshops with the customer, we identify which battery models are in scope, we review the available data against the regulation, understand where the gaps are, and then we defined the implementation roadmap. And then by the end of this phase, companies have a very clear picture of what they already have and what still needs to be done. At the same time, we run phase 2, which is the technical work stream. So the business teams are working through the workshops and the regulatory topics, but our technical teams are already mapping the customer systems. So whether that's SAP, any ERP system, PLM systems or EMS or other platforms, and then understanding where the data lives and then designing the future integration. So we have found that running these 2 phases in parallel avoids delays and significantly speeds up the implementation. And then it will come to phase 3, which is automation and scaling. So here's where the integrations go live, then the data starts flowing automatically. Companies gradually expand from one battery model to multiple models, more suppliers, and eventually their full product portfolio. So I think that breaking the project into phases makes it much more manageable because companies don't have to solve everything on day 1. they can start creating value immediately, but also building toward full compliance in a structured and predictable way.
That makes a lot of sense. Sounds a bit more manageable. Pavlina, in this process, where do companies get stuck? So what's the hardest part of getting this done?
So yeah, the hardest part is definitely not the passport platform or how do you create the passports. It's just to build on to what Jackie said about the phased approach. It's more about establishing reliable data ownership and then a governance model. So usually at the start, companies would be, let's say, caught up off guard in a phase where they know they have what are their battery models and the type of categories, but they don't know for which of them the battery passports might be applicable. And then information, as you start diving deep into the requirements, information is spread across different departments, also different systems. No one owns the complete data set. So usually that would be the first initial picture that is very, let's say, challenging at the beginning until you set up and define responsibilities and governance. And then is the bit with other partners and suppliers. Most often, depending on the cases, companies do supply cells or maybe modules or packs from external suppliers. Some of them might be located in Europe, some of them might be abroad. So this is another aspect you need to take into account, because when you are relying for a certain portion of the data on the battery passport on supplier information, they might respond slowly, or there might be some confidentiality concerns here. So that needs to be taken into account. And of course, as we start getting deep dive into all the data attribute, then usually we would have questions about the unique identifiers, the QR code process, the versioning of the passport, something that has been coming up in the last months with the latest update of the data attribute list. So those would be some of the, let's say, technical points that are, let's say, more challenging at the start. But of course, the most effective approach is just to start with a narrow model scope, initiate or see where data is coming from, assign owner, and run a test for a passport for a specific battery model. See where the gaps are, and based on that, companies have a clearer picture how they can move for the next steps and go forward, so that they can apply the same basically structure to every other battery model they have on their side. So it would generally be around those points, I would say.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you, Pavlina. Nathan, most companies already run ERP, PLM, and manufacturing systems. So how does the battery passport actually connect to what they've already got, and what does that integration layer look like?
Sure. One of the most important things to keep in mind about the battery passport is that you'll have the data in your internal systems, but that's not necessarily exposed to the world. And that's why the EU has required the battery passport to live on providers like us, where it's collected in one place. So there are two main ways we can get the data from a company's internal systems into ours. The first is via API. So we've provided a RESTful API, and there are companies that we work with right now that prefer this approach, where they build a connector and they push data from their systems. They collect it in a data lake, they push it from their systems to ours, and so they have control over how and when the data gets published. The other way, which is actually a lot easier and a newer way, is that we've built a connector. So we have our own integration layer where companies can provide API keys to something like SAP for HANA or there are other systems, and we can pull the data from the systems and populate the battery passport, and then this can be controlled through our user interface. So both are possible. The second way is a little bit easier. The first way allows companies a bit more control.
Great. Thank you so much. By the way, guys, we also see questions coming in now. If you have any questions, please pop them in the Q&A and we'll get to them at the end. Okay, Jackie, let's jump to the question on everyone's lips. So how much do digital battery passports cost?
Yeah, thank you. This is definitely one of the first questions every customer asks, and it's a fair one. At Minespider, we've kept our commercial model very simple, because after speaking with hundreds of battery manufacturers, we realized companies don't want to be calculating software costs every time production increases. So Most of our competitors, they charge implementation fees, setup costs, price per battery, and so on. And we do not. So we do not charge per passport, per battery, per QR code scan. We charge a flat fee per year. So today we offer 3 subscription plans. So we have the base plan that is 11.9K per year, our plus plan at 19.7K per year, and our enterprise plan at 34.5K per year. So the right plan depends on the complexity of your implementation, the platform features that you require, and the level of support your team needs. But whether you're producing 100 batteries or 100,000, the subscription remains the same. And that gives our customers a very predictable cost model so they can focus on scaling their battery passport program rather than worrying about licensing costs increasing every year. We actually recently received feedback from one of the largest battery passport RFQs that we've participated in, where they described Minespider as offering the combination of compliance today, production scale, and the lowest cost, most transparent commercial structure. And I think that really captures what we've been trying to achieve at Minespider, because we want companies to know exactly what they're paying on from day one with no hidden costs as they grow.
Great. No, I love that. We love a bit of transparency, especially around pricing. So, looking ahead to the deadline, Pavlina, if a company isn't ready by February 2027, what's actually at stake beyond compliance?
Yeah, so the deadline has not moved. Obviously, we are aware that some acts are yet pending or in the process of being from draft to officialized, implementing or delegated acts, but the date for 18th of February still stands for battery passports. So basically, if a company is not ready, it might be more than a compliance issue. So missing or non-compliant passport information could potentially lead to custom checks or delays, kind of disruption of product imports and market placements, and potential additional questions from market surveillance authorities. So when it comes to penalties are expected and mentioned in the EU battery regulation, but those will be basically on a EU member state level. So the precise details or consequences may vary depending on the different country or the member state. But I think the key point here is how this practical risk will apply in terms of making sure your products are still present on the market, any reputational risks, any delays with clients, and in general, the whole process of import, because there is still a requirement for certain batteries which are imported to have these battery passports at the point of custom check. So I would say, aside from the penalties, losing market presence, I would see as the biggest risk in this case.
Yeah, very fair. Nathan, a lot of automotive suppliers are hearing about Catena-X. So how does a battery passport actually connect to it, and what does participating actually unlock for a manufacturer?
Yeah, absolutely. So the main thing about Catena-X, if you've heard about it, is an infrastructure that was set up by a set of German automakers in order to receive information from their suppliers. And it's what's called a peer-to-peer system. So you've got basically a matchmaker, but the data goes between companies directly. If you're supplying Daimler, BMW, Volkswagen, Mercedes, then you will probably be asked to supply data using Catena-X, and if you're in their supply chains as well. What we've done is we've added a Catena-X integration layer. So basically, companies who need this are able to do this with Minespider, is that it packages the data in the appropriate format and sends it peer-to-peer. It's not required to use Minespider. We added it as an option. And because you need it mainly if you're in these specific supply chains or if it's needed for you. In order to make it work, you need to have a couple of additional features. You need your own what's called an Eclipse data space connector, and we can walk you through that process if there's any sort of need.
Great. Thanks, Nathan. Okay, we're heading into the last section, guys. We see a lot of questions coming in, which we'll get to after this final part. So please add yours, by the way, if you still have one. Jackie, if a company wants to be ready for February 2027, where should they realistically start?
Yeah, start now or as soon as you can. But not because what we were discussing already before, not because you need to have every battery passport finished tomorrow, but because these projects involve much more than creating just a digital record. So you really need to understand your data. You need to engage with your suppliers, define internal ownership, prepare your systems, think about integrations, and also establish governance around how the information will be maintained over time. And none of these activities happen overnight. So one thing that I've noticed over the past year is that companies who start early are much more relaxed because they have time to learn, to make adjustments, and also to improve the process gradually. So the companies that wait will likely be competing for the same internal resources, same implementation partners, and the same technical teams, but also while working against much tighter deadlines. So the regulation may come into force in February 2027, but implementation doesn't start in February 2027. It starts with the decisions companies make today. And even if it's just selecting one battery model and even creating just one, your first passport, taking that first step now will make everything else significantly easier later.
Right. Alrighty, Pavlina, if you could tell every battery maker or battery ecosystem member one thing who are watching today, what would it be?
Well, my advice would be if they haven't started this process already, maybe the first starting point is to see or to familiarize themselves with the battery categories, which categories are applicable for the battery passport. In this case, if you are an EV industrial battery provider above the 2 kilowatt watts capacity, or an LMT, like means of transport battery producer, importer, or distributor, I would say the first thing is to conduct a practical data availability assessment. So see whether you fall within the categories for which the battery passport applies, and do a simple exercise. Go through the data attribute list, which is available, and see who owns the data. Is it available? Is it on your site? Where is it stored? Who owns it? Can it may be public, or is something that it needs to be with restricted access? And then if you have a lot of data points which are dependable on suppliers or other partners, this then exercise can give you a better view, a better understanding on what the implementation or interaction with the different departments or external parties might look like. And based on that, you still have time to calculate how you can be compliant with the timeline and put a real plan of action in there. Of course, after that internal exercise, you still need a digital battery service provider. So this can give a good basis to further move into that part after that.
Brilliant, thank you. And last question for Nathan. So beyond the deadline, why are companies moving now actually getting ahead, not just ticking a compliance box?
Well, I'll tell you why, is because once you start creating digital records and digital twins for your batteries, you're actually giving yourself a basis or an infrastructure layer to be ready for a lot of changes that are happening globally. We've already had companies start to use the data in the digital battery passport to estimate prices, force resale of batteries, for inputting the data into automated systems. And as AI becomes more and more powerful and more adopted in industrial settings, AI can only interact with what it can see. And so today, everyone is concerned about compliance, and that makes sense. Going forward, everyone will be concerned about automating processes and being ready for the new economy. And this is where companies are really going with it.
Great. Okay. Thank you so much, team. So now I'm going to move to some targeting some of these questions in the Q&A. So first question, as we're talking about data and data attributes, maybe you can also touch on interoperability too.
I can take that one.
Okay.
So oftentimes interoperability comes up, and the question is, what do we mean by it? How do you want systems to interoperate? And there are different levels. So one of the ways that interoperability has been getting solved is by the emergence of standards. With the DIN standard, with battery passports, regulatory standards, we have a lot of guidance now as to what data fields should be there. And just knowing which data fields need to be included already gives us a basis for getting two systems to talk to each other. The next level is how that data gets transferred. And this is what's coming up on, and the goal on Sunday with the EU battery registry is having that pointer of each battery pointing to where the data is stored, and we know the data is going to be in certain formats with certain data fields. That already makes a difference. Then beyond that, the question is, how does data get exchanged between different systems? And this is where APIs come in. So we've got an API, different companies want different APIs. And so then you're able to make API calls to exchange data between the systems. So it's a complex field, but interoperability is becoming increasingly solved for these main use cases that have come into the field.
Okay, thank you for elaborating, Nathan. Okay, the next question I'm going to hit up is pricing here. So we have one, what is the response you're getting for this price model? What are the clients asking for? Jackie, I'll maybe pass to you for that one.
Yeah, of course. Thank you. Oh, that's a good question. Overall, the feedback has actually been very positive. So companies tell us they really appreciate how simple and predictable the model is because it's one less thing they need to worry about while preparing for compliance. So the questions we usually get, they aren't about changing the pricing model. They are more around which plan is the right fit for us, what features are included in each plan, or can we start with a smaller scope and expand later? So I think those are the conversations we are having much more often. At the end of the day, customers wants to focus on implementing the battery passport, not on calculating software costs every time they launch a new battery model or they increase their production. And I think that's exactly what this pricing model is designed to achieve.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. I'm bringing one from the chat here, perhaps for Pavlina, regarding industrial batteries. What counts as an industrial battery under the regulation, and are they treated differently?
Very good question. Maybe just before I provide the industrial battery categorization here. So in general, there are 5 battery categories defined in the EU battery regulation. We have the portable type of batteries, the SLI or the starting, lightning and ignition batteries. Then we have the electric vehicle batteries, LMT, light means of transport batteries, one applicable for scooters, and the industrial batteries. So out of these 5 different battery categories, the battery passport is applicable only for 3. That would be the electric vehicles, the LMT, and the industrial batteries. So in terms of the industrial batteries specifically, any battery that doesn't fall within the scope of these categories that I mentioned, but weighs above 5 kilograms, is usually considered an industrial battery. So it's a broad range of let's say, batteries or category which encompass intended to be used mostly for industrial purposes. So for communication, for transport, for stationary energy storage, and so on. So they would be under these categories. And when we are speaking about the battery passport, there are 2 main subgroups of industrial batteries applicable. So they are divided between stationary energy storage batteries. They have a different set of data attributes. And the other category is basically other industrial batteries. So that would be the general broader categorization of those.
Thank you so much, Pavlina. Okay, the next question. How would companies anticipate extra costs if it's like Catena-X integration in addition to the DPP platform costs? Is it a must? Nathan, can I throw you this one?
Everything is only a must if you need it, right? So if you're selling to German auto manufacturers who require Catena-X, then you need it. And if you don't, then you don't. The way that you would estimate the cost, at least for Catena-X, is the main cost is that you need your own Eclipse data space connector. So this costs like €1,000 or something like that. It's not a back-breaking cost, and I believe there's even an initiative of the German government right now that can help fund companies who want to adopt Catena-X. It's called the what's it called? The Data Space Accelerator, I believe. And the thing about Catena-X is that it's not just for battery passports, right? So it's almost like an app store for different applications of data that you want to exchange. So they've got certificate exchange, you've got product carbon footprint, you've got battery passport, you've got several other applications as well. And so you would estimate the cost based on which pieces of that you need, depending on what you're doing.
Right. Yeah. Thank you, Nathan. Okay, down to the last two questions. The next one, do you have some tips for the companies who are just starting on DPP? How can they navigate? Perhaps I can throw this one to Jackie.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I think one thing I would really encourage companies to do is to treat the battery passport as an opportunity, not just a compliance exercise. So yes, the regulation is the main driver today, but once you start bringing all of your product information together, you also improve internal processes, data quality, and also collaboration across different teams. I think I would also recommend assigning clear ownership early because one of the biggest challenges we see today isn't the technology. It's everyone assuming someone else is responsible. So having one person or one small team coordinating the project makes a huge difference. And then finally, I think don't be afraid to ask questions because this is a new topic for everyone. We speak with companies every day, and even the largest manufacturers are still figuring out part of it, figuring out parts of the regulation itself. So I think that sharing experiences and learning from others is one of the fastest ways to move forward.
Great. Thanks, Jackie. And maybe this one might also be for you. Doesn't a fixed fee model put small operators, e.g. in LMT, with low volumes at a massive disadvantage?
Yeah, that's a fair question. I think it's something we thought about when designing our pricing. But the reality that we found out is that the biggest cost of the battery passport isn't the number of batteries, it's the implementation. So whether a company is producing, as I said before, 200 batteries a year or 220,000 or 250,000, they still need to understand the regulation. They need to map their data. They need to involve different departments, set up integrations, and establish the right processes. And then a lot of that work is very similar regardless of the volume. So for smaller operators, we also try to keep the barrier to entry as low as possible. So they can start with a pilot, they can choose a subscription plan that best fits their needs, and that they can expand this over time. But I think our goal here is to make compliance achievable without creating unexpected costs as they grow. And we found that customers value that predictability much more than a model where costs keep changing based on production volumes.
If I could also throw in another observation,
Please.
is that most smaller manufacturers have anticipation of growing, and they prefer this type of model because it keeps their cost predictable over the years as they expand from small volumes to larger to larger.
Yeah, very good point, Nathan. Okay, guys. Well, that was all the questions we have. I know it was a lot of content condensed in a very short time frame, but thank you so much for tuning in. We're going to be doing these webinars more regularly. So in the meantime, if you have any questions or you would want to know what your specific path to compliance looks like, feel free to shoot us an email anytime at hello@minespider.com. Otherwise, we'll be having another webinar in September, and of course, you'll be receiving an invite to that one. So thank you so much for tuning in, and we hope to see you in September, if not speak to you before. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, everyone.
Have a good day.
Thank you, everyone.
Goodbye.